Hi, good evening. Welcome to the 287th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on text and image work, comics, animation, and other forms of narrative art. These lectures are funded in part by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation. Our guest tonight is Vanessa German, a visual and performance artist based in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of Homewood. She is the founder of Love Front Porch and the ARThouse, a community arts initiative for the children of the Homewood neighborhood. Her work is in private and public collections, including the Everson Museum of Art, the Flint Institute of Arts, Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, David C. Driskell Center, the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art, and the Wellin Museum of Art at Hamilton College. She is the recipient of the 2015 Lewis Comfort Tiffany Foundation grant, the 2017 Jacob Lawrence Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the 2018 United States Artist Grant. And most recently, the 2018 Don Tyson Prize from Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Her talk tonight is entitled Love and Grief and Imagination and Staying Alive, Really, Really Alive. So here's Vanessa.
Greetings. How are you all?
Good.
I'm Vanessa, and I'm in my studio in Pittsburgh, and I am a Black woman, and I have a heart-shaped face, I have red lipstick on, and I have two ponytails, and I'm wearing a butterfly earring. I'm in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh called Homewood, and my neighborhood is in, it's probably one of the Blackest neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is on Haudenosaunee land, Seneca Nation land. Land that was violently taken from the Seneca Nation. And I am, it's election night, feels a little weird. I saw some things today that I actually was surprised to see. I saw, you know, we were going to get lunch today, and I saw a truck with a Confederate flag flying on it, a very large Confederate flag rolling very slowly through the Walmart parking lot with a lot of language on it that let me know the people driving the car were both armed and in absolute livid disgust with Black people. They drove by me 2 miles an hour, really slow. And saw people in my neighborhood doing that. And I also live in a neighborhood that's a really Black neighborhood. So it feels really weird to be in the land of the free and the home of the brave right now. But I hope that wherever you are feeling, that you feel loved, because all the other things will come and go. I hope that you're feeling and able to express the love that you feel inside of you. I am going to share some images with you. I'm going to do some performance with you today. So I am going to, thank you, love. I am going to, thank you. It's going to be hard. I have to plug in, but I'm going to gonna show some images, talk about work. If you have questions at any point, you can put them into the chat and they'll pop up on the screen and I'll answer your questions. I am going to make some performance today also, and making performance, I'm gonna make performance with someone who is in the audience, which means I'm gonna give you this information now. You can think about if you want to participate actively in this making of performance with me. So the way that it would work is you can either put in the chat box, you can say, I want you to make a performance with me or for me. And in the chat box, you would say that you want me to choose you. And then I would ask you for 3 ingredients. And the ingredients I ask for are a name, and it can be any name. It can be your name. It can be just a name that feels right and resonates with you. A name, a color, and a purpose. And thinking about purpose as a magical place of transaction by dint of the fact that this moment, this night, this time, the poem making, the performance making on the spot will happen. And there can be an equation sign on the other side of that happening that would bring about whatever magical purpose, whatever you decide you want to happen on the other side of it. So yesterday I made a performance for someone and they gave me the color green. They gave me the name Daylight, and the purpose was harmony. So that gives you an example. So just think about now if you want me to make a poem for you, and if it's possible and you would like me to make performance with you, perhaps we can have Ben promote you to the screen, and I can share screen time, and we can talk a little bit before I make the performance for you. So I'm going to begin by sharing some images and talking about how I came to be an artist, because giving talks for academic institutions is something that I thought that for a period in my life I wouldn't do, because I'm a self-taught artist. And when I would visit academic institutions, it seemed really important to people in the institution to let me know how exclusive the environment was and how othered I was in that environment as somebody who did not receive formal training in an academic institution. So I am going to share with you how I came to my art, and then we'll look at the forms of that art and look at some specific work. If you have any questions, you can ask, and then I'll actually close out by making the poem for someone. So I'm going to share screen right now. Ask questions at any time, even if you have questions about a specific work of art or a material in the work of art, just ask. And we will allow that curiosity and the desire of your question to lead us into the place that we go, the places we shall go. Let curiosity bring us into the places we shall go. All right, so sometimes I might sing this lecture also, I might sing this talk, but you'll be able to follow it because I'll talk sing. So this is a work of art that is called, this is a sculpture that's called Power Figure to Keep Me Alive. A caution warning throughout this whole talk about conversation, talk about suicide and violence, street violence, gun violence, and mental illness. And I shouldn't have to give a caution warning to discuss white supremacy, but I'm going to do it just in case people think that that's not a real thing. We're going to talk about that also. So this is a work called Power Figure to Keep Me Alive. Look close, and I will zoom into part of it because I want you to take a look at the different textures that you see there. And just look at what objects you recognize, things that might have mystery in them. what don't you recognize? And what does this piece feel like to you when you look at it? Does it have a feeling? What does it reference to you? What do you see? What have you seen before? What does it feel like? This work is called Power Figure to Keep Me Alive. And this is the work that brought me into an understanding about the way that power is active in my life, and power is active in my humanity, power is active in my physical body, and power is active in my soul. So this artwork came at a period in my life where I was deciding whether or not I wanted to stay alive. I was having probably the same issue that a lot of people have, which is how to be really alive in your body, in your heart, in your soul, in your intellectual prowess, in your spiritual prowess, in a meritocracy, in a land that really values labor in different ways, depending on whose body is producing, moving through the labor. And so as a Black woman, that if you look at me in certain times in certain dress, I actually look like a mammy. I'm a round Black woman with heavy breasts and bright eyes and big round cheeks. And I look like that stereotypical branded image of a mammy, the Black woman giving her body to the care, the feeding, the nutrition, and the nourishing of the lives of human beings who are not her family. So I was going to end my life at this period of time because I was really confused about the amounts of violence that were in the world around me and that were being directed at me, physical violence, political violence, and the ways that I had internalized that violence and was actually I was giving it to myself. So what I started to do was give myself full permission for 6 months, because this was, I thought, either going to be the make it or break it 6 months of my life, where I decided to end my life or I decided to go on. And what I did was this scientific experiment to see if I could do whatever I wanted every single day, and I could do what felt right every single day, and that would bring me into a full, true sustainability for my body, my heart, my soul, my political identity, and all of my other identities as a queer, fat, Black, holy woman. So every day I would walk my dog and I would walk around my neighborhood and I would pick things up off the ground. I'd pick up old weave hair. So you see that hair hanging down? That's hair that I would just pick up that would have either been pulled out of someone's hair during a fight or was in the trash, and it just blows around the street. You've probably walked past weave hair and braid hair on the ground. I would pick up a lot of old peas and shells and the seed pods that fell from the trees, feathers from birds. I would dig bottles up out of the ground because I live in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh that has really suffered from the ending of the steel mills and everything else. So there's lots of stuff left behind in abandoned houses that people left to get other jobs, or people died and nobody claimed these houses. And so I would pick things up every single day, walking my dog, and I would come back to my damp Pittsburgh basement and I would stack wood and I would move objects around until they felt right to me. That was the only criteria, which might sound like an oversimplification, which might sound paltry, which might sound really flimsy in a meritocracy, in a place where you perform your labor, you perform your value, you perform your success. All I did for 6 months was serve the frequency of rightness for my body, my physical body, and my soul. So what would your life be like if you did whatever you wanted? I would venture to vision that your life wouldn't look terribly different, that you would probably like your job. Maybe you would do it less, maybe you do it more, maybe you would still wake up at exactly the time of the morning that you want to wake up. So every day for 6 months, I did whatever I wanted to do. I worked on these figures, which at the end of the 6 months, I realized they had actually saved my life, because in that time I found this language of materiality into a frequency of construction that carried inside of every intricate detail of the production, carried a space of freedom and breath around my thoughts, around my sort of the issues that I was contending with were transmuted through the materials into these figures at the end of the 6 months. And at the time I was living in such extreme poverty. I had not had running water for half a year. I would just collect water in a Home Depot bucket off of a broken gutter. And so at the end of the 6 months, I put some of these sculptures into a juried exhibition that was actually being juried by a curator that was from New York, from the Met or MoMA. I don't remember, because it was like 17 or 18 years ago. And so this curator sees my work, juries it into the show at the Carnegie Museum. My work won several awards, and a dealer from New York saw the work, and eventually they bought a lot of it, and it got placed in collections. This artwork, Power Figure to Keep Me Alive, is currently in the Progressive Collection in Cleveland. So what I learned from this experiment, this personal, social, political experiment as a Black woman on the land of America. So Black women were never envisioned by the founders of this country to be whole human beings, or be or to ever have their own designed relationship with freedom or resources. So to have this really political experiment, this radical experiment into dimensional sustainability through doing whatever I wanted to do, coming into making these sculptures that sustained my life and brought me then even something that I did not recognize would happen, was like the deep financial sustainability that came from this, because that dealer bought these works individually, each for several thousands of dollars, which like blew my mind at the time. And that changed my life. So they're literally power figures because it brought me into recognition of the power, the frequency of the artist that is inside of me. So those of you who are listening to this right now, who are artists, you recognize that you are an artist, that the artist inside of you is its own you have your own technology as an artist, and you're in a frequency of rightness and sharpening and bringing deep dimensional clarity to the frequency of your artist, of the artist inside of you. And that happened to me really intensely over 6 months. And then continues to happen because we always are becoming more of who we are. This is my studio, and it is one of the things that came, one of the really important understandings that came through the 6 months that I had in my studio of really saving my own life and finding out why I had hands and lungs, was this recognition of a place of the power of beauty to disrupt, and the power of beauty to be an entrance into other realms. And so I live in the hood. I live, like years ago when the NRA, when the National Rifle Association had its national convention in Pittsburgh, the Rachel Maddow show did a series of shows in my neighborhood in Homewood in Pittsburgh. And the shows were called Homewood, America's Most Dangerous Neighborhood, because I live in a really small neighborhood that had a statistically astronomical amount of street death. So in my neighborhood, it was really, really surprising to people, and wonderfully surprising for people to experience me as an artist, bringing the art outside of my house and bringing it intentionally into public spaces and sharing it. Because what I realized when I was in my studio is that I didn't just figure out how to keep myself alive as an artist. I realized that I had found the love of my life. And I began at that point to call myself a citizen artist. And I define myself as a citizen artist because citizen gives me entrance into defining and centering how I inhabit my entire humanity. So the beginning of definition of citizen is an inhabitant of. So like, what would you say you're an inhabitant of? You're an inhabitant of your neighborhood. You're an inhabitant of, how do you inhabit all of your identities? And if you could give a central engine to your identities, what would that central engine be? Would it be money? Like my queerness is centered around money, or whatever. Like you decide for yourself. What would you say the central engine, how you inhabit your identities, and the central engine of that? For me, it is love, and it is art, and it's work, and all of that is the work. So I came to this place where I would not only, I started to make art outside of my house, because there was this little girl who watched me for hours through my basement window, watched me making things while her friends played around her. She did not move at all. And so I started to bring work outside and put it on my front porch and make art on my front porch. And I realized that what I was doing was trying to have this really clear relationship between what I loved and the space where I lived, and sharing what I loved right where I live, loving the language that Bell Hooks has about how love makes more of itself. So this is in my neighborhood. And I shoot a photo series called The Blacks, which was up at Rockefeller Center at 45 Rock for the first 3.5, 4 months of this year. The Blacks started the year that Mike Brown was killed and the Black Lives Matter protests began. And I had friends who were expressing deep misery on social media, the desire to not leave the house, to not be in conversation with people who wanted to talk about like casual, small talk, little things, because they were in such a state of despair and grief that through just by seeing repeated images of Black death, that they were shutting down. And so I would go through social media and I would look to see who was expressing those things, and I would invite them to my home. I would make clothes for them. I would do their hair, I'd do their makeup. And then we would walk around my neighborhood. We'd walk around the neighborhood and take pictures, different places. And we would attract a little crowd. People would stop their cars and they would take pictures, and they would say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that these models are in the neighborhood." And I'd be like, "Well, these aren't models. These are actually your neighbors. These are your neighbors. These are the kids who live on the street." And the kids who live on the street would start to follow me around as we would do the photo shoots, and they would basically interview anybody that I was photographing. And they would start to take the props that I had for the photo shoots, and they would put them on, and they would become their own artists, and I would give them the cameras and let them shoot photos also. And it was a way that we were in affirmation of our the value of our lives and the place that we lived, which is often a place that's talked about as though it's deeply sick and something's wrong. This photograph was taken right after the police held me. Probably 20 minutes before I shot this photo, the police made me stand still with all of my cameras around my neck and prove to them that I was a photographer, and that I was a serious artist, and that the cameras were mine, and that when I said I was shooting pictures, that I was shooting images, that I was shooting this person that's wearing the painted suit, that I didn't mean I was shooting them with a gun. And so they literally made me stand there still with this artist who's the writer Brian Broom, and like tried to goad me and like humiliate me, and that was 20 minutes before I shot this photo. So the taking of the photographs becomes a performance through the streets. So I work in photography, I work in fashion, I work in wearable art, I do whatever I want to do. And I hope that you do too. I hope that you live a life where you feel like you can actually do whatever you want to do. All of the things that I've shared and showed you, all of this to me is love. How would you say that you are most active in sharing love in your life and being inside of love Is it inside of your relationships? How are you, if you're artists, are you experiencing love in your studio? I define love for myself as creative, understanding, redemptive, transformative, goodwill in livid action, which means in the circle of yourself. And so this internal and external cycle and circle of that. The best ways that I do that is through sharing what I love and being vulnerable and being courageous, which is not actually, it's not romantic. Sometimes it's very painful, but I understand how to keep myself alive now. So I'm just going to scroll through some other images of my work so that you can see how it takes up space, working with a lot of images of the Black Madonna, the mother of all creativity. One of the ways that I share the work that I create, especially at this point, when you see this image of me in this dress with this small sculpture, I would take small discrete sculptures that I made out onto the street and onto the city bus and have these amazing conversations with people who don't speak art language. They just speak curiosity, they speak heart, they speak relationship and connection. And so I would take sculptures out and have these amazing conversations, just being in public space with things that, and it was one of the things I found is that adults are really afraid. They're afraid to be wrong. They're afraid to ask questions. They're afraid to look like they don't know something. And it's actually children who follow their curiosity with a brightness and without self-judgment. I would meet a lot of adults who felt and sometimes would express the pain at not knowing the way. How do you talk about art? How do you engage with it? And feeling like it wasn't for them. And had a young man cry to me at the Flint Museum of Art because he said, I don't know how to talk this language. I don't know how to tell you how I feel or think about what I'm experiencing, because I know that there's a way that you're supposed to do that, and I'm outside of that way. And that was a really fascinating thing to see, that idea in his head caused him so much pain. So I went from making single discrete objects like you see right here to making entire communities of objects. I no longer make single discrete objects. So this is from a body of work called I Come to Do Violence to the Lie, which comes from a King quote. It's like, how do you could kill liars every day of the week. You could kill liars because they lie to you and they hurt you with their lies, but how do you actually kill a lie? And so I spend a lot of time really having to find ways to transform the experiences that I have in my body on this land into forms of generative expression, because the desire I have sometimes to do violence when the violence is done against me has been strong in the past, but how to do violence to lies. And that's what this work is about. So literally the site of the work is doing violence to the lie. The soundtrack that exists inside of this body of work does violence to the lie. And each of the power figures in and of themselves are weapons against a certain lie. And the lie that is contended with in this body of work is the lie of separation. The human beings are 99.9% genetically identical. Mostly human beings are just water, carbon, and ideas. And given that we are the earth and we are all earthlings, that's contending with the lie of separation, which is, for me, the root of so much violence that I experience around the lie of separation. I have a really small studio. It's where I am right now. So when we go to photograph my work, we take it out into the street, into the alleyway, and it's amazing what happens when we take the work outside. This is the work at the Wadsworth Atheneum. It's toured a couple of other places. The work will never be shown again wholly because it's 31 figures, and it's sort of in this installation on this sparkly golden earth inside of the museum in a tunnel. It's creating like a tunnel in the gallery with work lights with work light strung, not a lot of gallery lighting, visually inspired by the arrest of the terracotta soldiers, the terracotta army. So the 31 figures are all spread out around the country now. It'll never show all together again. And it exists with this soundtrack. So it plays like a 50-layer soundtrack that expresses the simultaneity of time. All right, I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to talk about some other specific works. And then if anybody wants me to make a work for them, make a poem for them, you can put information into the, you can put information into the chat, and I'll do that. And I think that if you're scared to do it, you should do it. So I'm gonna show you some, I'm gonna show you some works, some more recent works, and I'm gonna show you a picture of the ARThouse, and then we're gonna be done. So this work is work that was from my show at Fort Gansevoort, a show called Trampoline, that was at Fort Gansevoort in the meatpacking district this last fall into winter. And these are figures that some of which they sit right up against the wall, and they're like heavily adorned figurative altars where the body is an altar and the entire work is an altar. There's a lot of text inside of the work that is cheeky, that is speaking, that is saying one thing and meaning another thing. And so if I pull in close to this work is called It's the Real Thing. And you can see in the close-up that it's holding it's a old like 1970s Coca-Cola bag, and it says It's the Real Thing. And this work is called It's the Real Thing. And so everything in the work is there on purpose, because I'm looking at the work as a ritual in sight. So where the eye meets any object and then connects to the object next to it and connects to the object next to that, the way that poetry moves, and there becomes this relationship that the mind tries to make between all of the objects that are there. Like, why is there an old Doughboy doll next to an Air Jordan Nike, next to an inn, a light up inn, and it says It's the Real Thing on top of there. So the work is communicating this sort of ritual of movement of eye and the connection between what seem like disparate objects, but really they function for me as language that connects into an entire narrative. But the ritual of standing in front of the work and experiencing it with whatever the viewer brings to the work is also, for me, that is part of the work. Part of the work is what happens inside of the person and the curiosity of trying to make connections and relationships between the objects and the text within the piece, and what the text is telling you and what it is not telling you, like what's really happening in that work. And so there's a way that I can perform this work. I can read the work, and in reading the work, I will list every single object, all of the material that's in the work, from black pigment, tar, hand-blown crystal glass tears, titty tassels, green snake in left hand, fire hose sign, 2 X's for the cross, but I also will list everything that is invisible in the work, and that becomes the performance of the work. So the performance of the work includes the rage, 7 sexual assaults, all of the eyes of my ancestors, reading the work is this process that reveals the invisible secret work inside of the work also. So this show was called Trampoline because it speaks for me to this place of the ways that I sometimes have to jump up and down inside of different codes and different economies of politics just to stay alive. And it also speaks to, so if there's the being on the trampoline, there is also its opposite, which is being off the trampoline. What happens when you stop playing any game and stop code switching altogether? So inside of this work is called How Can I Love You with Capitalism? Tell me how. And there is text included in the I apologize that I don't have detailed pictures of this for you to see, but inside of the picture frame, and then the stack of books that are on the chair, it's like it's a housekeeping book for women, how to keep a house in like the 1950s, another book called The Tribe That Lost Its Head, and another book, a John F. Kennedy book about freedom. And so what I want to happen with the work is that people follow the objects and make an attempt to make connections and see what happens inside of them in that attempt to make connections. Using in my work these light up symbols and letters that come from sign companies. They're sign letters for businesses. So using LED and neon in the work, a little bit of text that is just enough to bring you in and to twist you around inside of the work. One of the pieces that I'll talk about specifically is this piece right here, the jump work, which is, this work is like 7 feet tall. Those are LED letters that spell out jump, and white rubber glove molds from the textile factories, danger, unsafe area sign, and a black figure totally sticky in tar that is jumping, is held in a frozen jump motion. And what you can't see is the figure is wearing bejeweled underwear. And this is a work about how my mother told me when I was a little girl how to recognize when men meant me harm. And she would say, just because somebody smiles at you or they offer you a ride home. I was a very like innocent, naive, kind of like oddly sheltered in my mind child. And so my mother had to explain to me that how to recognize a good smile and a bad smile, and how to recognize when a man meant me harm, because I was really oblivious to a lot of things. And my mother told me when I was a kid, she said, don't play fight with anybody, Vanessa, because you never know when you're going to have to kill someone. She said, my mom really told me, she said, there might be a time when you have to fight for your life, and you're going to need to know the difference between the play fight and the real fight when you might need to kill somebody. So this work is about, speaks to that way that my mother taught me to protect my own body and to recognize the harm that could come to my body. And that teaching that my mother gave me also showed me, it was this specific way that you hear oftentimes about how the parents of Black sons have to teach them this lesson about how to behave in ways that preserve their lives when the imaginations of white people, the imaginations of police officers position them in this place that's monstrous. Like, little boy, how do you stay alive? Well, one of the things you don't hear often about is the talk that Black mothers have to give little Black girls, and that mothers have to give girls, or that fathers have to give girls or their queer children, about the ways that people are going to trespass upon your body and then trespass on your body into your soul. And so my mother very, sometimes what I thought was really coldly had to teach me that lesson. But what it also showed me was that I was valuable enough to be taught that lesson, which isn't really your value when you're a little Black girl. When I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I grew up with the recognition at some point that I did not see very many happy Black people in the media. And I started to count consciously the images of happy Black people, happy Black families, Black boys and girls in love and in kindness in the media. And so I didn't grow up consciously sort of ensconced in this narrative of Blackness and value. I grew up really recognizing the deep anti-Blackness that existed around me. So my mother teaching me these really hard lessons was evidence for me that I was actually valued, because that wasn't reflected back to me in the world around me. So thank you all for, thank you for this time. Does anybody have any questions? And if you don't, that's cool. It's a weird night. So I'll show you through some other images. That's another image of the jump work, and you can see these are actually, this was a woman's dainty fancy work purse from the Victorian era, bejeweled and all crystalled out. This is a work that I'm not going to talk about that work. This is the ARThouse. So one of the things that I centering my life around love and art and sharing, I ended up buying 2 houses in my neighborhood, and one of them, whenever the front door is open, anybody can come in, and there's lots of art supplies, and there's a reading room, there's a stage in the backyard, and a really large garden. And no one wands you down when you come in. It's a place that can be active for you right where you are. Some people come into the ARThouse and they just sit and they fall asleep. Some people come in after they get off work from the VA and they paint pictures, but anybody can come in. And this is a photo of about like 150, 200 people, 50 people outside the ARThouse after the Pulse nightclub massacre, where when that shooting happened, there was actively this resistance to holding any memorials in churches in Pittsburgh. There were people who were like, y'all can't come here and mourn and grieve. That's what happens to gay people. That, that's God's punishment to you. And so I just posted on social media that we could gather in the side lot, the vacant lot next to the ARThouse. And I was floored by how many people came and what it meant to them to have a place to gather. So in creating the ARThouse and running it for all of these years, what I realized is we needed spaces that were as alive and responsive and able to move with elasticity to envelop the community as we were wherever we are, and not necessarily fit and conform into these existing institutions, but to move really fluidly and with love, with creative understanding, redemptive, transformative goodwill into the undefined spaces. Like, undefined spaces really scare people, but we are able to do that at the ARThouse to move into those undefined spaces. Why? Partially because we're small, but also because we're first and foremost committed to human beings. So what the ARThouse looks like. The ARThouse hasn't been open since COVID-19. The only part of it that's active is the artist residency upstairs. I own several properties in my neighborhood, and they're all artist residencies. People live in them for free, and they have the space and the freedom to make the work that they need to make without exhausting themselves, just to get their basic needs met. So we have dance parties at the end of every ARThouse, and we do that because dancing is so good for your body, but a lot of times the things that happen at night and that you hear at night in the neighborhood build up like toxic stress in your body. So my cousin is a researcher, and she said, you know, what's really good is just to dance around. She said, literally, you could jump up and down and it would shift that buildup of cortisol, those stress hormones. So we also do it because it's joyful and it's fun, but it's really important to have these intentional moments of joy. Some kids from the ARThouse, and I make a lot of signs in my neighborhood. I make a lot of signs. They say they're yard signs. They look the same size as political yard signs, but they say things like, "Stop shooting, we love you," or "You are so beautiful," or they have people's names on them. So if I don't have any questions, and I don't see any questions, I'm going to come back up onto the screen really quickly, and I'm going to show you my there's a yeah, this is my studio, and if you see right there, there's a cat. That's Silver. That cat is Silver. That cat is an intersex cat, which was wild when I found out. Did you know there could be intersex cats? Yeah. I took Silver to go get fixed, and the vet said, "Come here, Silver. Do you want to be on TV?" No. Silver said no. But Silver, I'm going to try to go get them. Silver said, I took the cat to the vet to get fixed, and the vet said, "This cat doesn't have a penis, and it doesn't have ovaries." And they said, "But we found a testicle in the cat's leg, and that's Silver." And I was like, "What?" And the vet said, "This cat is intersex." And so this is Silver, the intersex cat, who is very judgmental about things that I'm working on in the studio. Here's a work that I'm doing right now. And Silver's like, "You can do that if you want to. I don't know that I would do that." But if nobody has questions, I will say thank you for your time. I'm going to read this comment out loud and see if I want to respond to it. Thank you, Maria. "I'm really amazed by your work about the first sculpture. It made me think in the tradition of ex votos, the vow made to a saint to think about life. And as you said, the making accompanied a process of searching for life." Yes. I find that a lot of I believe so deeply in all of the secret work that happens. Oh, hi, Silver. And all of the secret work that happens inside of process in the studio, in that space when it's just you and your hands and your imagination and your materials, and your brain, the engineering parts of your brain know what to do. And so this other part of yourself transcends the moment in the material, in the making, which is really old human technology, right? If we think about the like mandalas out of rice, or like the grains of sand, these forms of making that are also ritual and really recognized, they're really recognized as transformative and devotional processes. My studio is totally a conceptual, a spiritual, devotional space that is doing dimensional process simultaneously. So thank you all. Thank you, Flynn. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben's wife, Susan.
Thank you.
And
great. What did you look at? What kind of pictures and sculpture did you see as a growing up? And did you grow up in Pittsburgh?
No, I grew up in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in LA, and my mom was an artist. My mother was a fiber artist and made quilts. And so, but she also made us make everything. The cat's eating the braid. She made us make stuff. So we made all of our own clothes, and we made toys, and we made our hair stuff, and we built things all the time. So the work that I saw when I was growing up were the sculptures and paintings that my mother had in the house, which were mostly of women, Black Madonnas, and this is not a lot of artwork. But my mother also would drop us off at the museum when we were kids in the summertime. She would drop us off at 8:45 in the morning, and she would pick us up before the museum opened. She would pick us up when the museum closed. So we would spend all day at in the sort of like exhibition part of Exposition Boulevard by USC. We would spend all of our time in the Rose Garden and walking around the museum, and we got to know all the people who worked they got to know us, because my mom had 5 kids, so there'd be 5 of us around the museum. But mostly what I saw in that museum, that's like natural history, the Museum of Natural History, the Museums of Science and Industry. And so one of the things that I came to love when I was a kid was the way museums told you that things were important. That's what I really remember from those experiences, was how things were on pedestals or behind glass, and the language, the way that they gave certain objects language and told you how to look at something by the way that the spaces were designed, and they told you what was important. So also as a little girl in those spaces, I wondered why certain things weren't in there, if this is the things that were important enough to be in the museum. Thank you for asking me that question. Do you have any other questions, Ben?
Curious. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff, when you show it in the street and in your art house, it's really part of a community, right? I mean, it's something that's incredible, that's possible in your neighborhood. That would be hard to do in a place where things are very expensive. But how do you feel about this work ending up in, private collections or out of circulation? I mean, that way. Or is it just a way to make a living? Is that just subsidizing?
No, like I don't think about life like that at all. I don't actually ever use the phrase to make a living. That's not something that is a part of my ecosystem, this sort of separation of being into segments of time and labor that exist just so that you can pay your bills and things. That's not something that how I think about my life. But I also really, when I was first making the work, what I really wanted it to do, I wanted it to make people's lives more alive. And that sounds sort of wild to hear myself say, but it's true. That's grandiose. But I imagined the work in people's houses. And so I have done these installations where there are spaces that look like a living room into a dining room, and there's sculptures on all of these. They're all beyond ironing boards or end tables or dining room tables or chairs or what look like kitchen counters, because I had this vision that people would move through their life after coming home from what they do to make a living, and they would move through their home, through this place where everything was familiar. The coffee tables, the paintings, the placement of things in their home were super familiar, and they would have this one sculpture that had so many objects on it that they would look at it from on Thursday in a certain kind of light, and they would see something new inside of their own home where everything is placed on purpose and they know where everything is, but this sculpture would keep surprising them and would show up with different, depending on the light that you looked at it on the day of the week, that it would have newness to it that would bring newness and vitality into a space that might be, and into the life of somebody who might be stressed and burdened or like worried about something and moving very fast. And they would have this moment of curiosity and contemplation about the relationship of the objects to other objects, and why didn't they see that before? And so that was a big part of this fantasy that I would have in my studio when I was first working, is that the pieces would live inside of people's homes, and that eventually they would just keep adding to it. That they would like move out of one apartment and take that set of keys and add it to the sculpture. Or their mother would die and they would take the broken jewelry from her jewelry box and they would add it to a sculpture. They would ruin some paintbrushes and add it to a sculpture. Or they would start to adorn the table where the sculpture sat, if it's a tabletop sculpture, and put their old shoes underneath it, and that the piece would be really alive and it would activate their life and their creativity in ordinary sacred ways, in ways that were sort of mundane and miraculous simultaneously. So I don't have any kind of feeling about the work being in private collections. I don't feel like the work should not go places. I don't feel like it shouldn't be in private or public collections, because the work, what I said earlier about process, and there being this place where there is an entire universe of secret work that happens in the studio, in my mind and being as an artist, that nobody can put that in their home. You can't put it on a shelf. You can't put it in a public or private collection. It exists inside of me and for the work and for the work that comes after that. So people ask me that sometimes, like I'm betraying Blackness by letting people buy the work. And I don't think that. I'm like, if you were a surgeon, you would make surgeries, right? You would do surgeries where surgeries are done using the tools of surgery. And sometimes you might have to do things in a surprising way, but the work goes and is done where the work goes and is done.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Thanks.
Right, thank you.
Thank
More
you. Thank you,
comments.
everybody.
Thank you.
I'm reading your comments. I'm reading your comment, Karina. I hope, and I'm reading, thank you, Flynn. Oh, presenting us Silvertooth, my trans cat, really loved him. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Flynn. Thank you, everybody. I hope that your night is, I hope that you feel loved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Good night.
Good night.